They ask me a lot of questions about our president, about what's going on right now in our relationship.
Yeah, he seems to be playing right into that. By the way, they just did it again last hour.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
While interviewing photographer David Gudenfelder for this film, North Korea tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, for the third time in 4 months. It is believed to have the ability to strike any part of mainland America. Just 3 hours earlier, we sat down with the New York Times' Carol Giacomo.
Well, they haven't tested in 2 months, and that's a good sign.
This is how quickly the North Korea story can change. A living history, vexing its neighbors and the U.S. for over 70 years.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it.
The dictator of North Korea made a choice yesterday that brings the world closer to war, not farther from it.
North Korea.
As the rhetoric escalates, the narrative remains the same. North Korea's official name is Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, a nation roughly the size of Mississippi. At best, a nuisance. At worst, a very dangerous threat. In a part of the world that is intrinsically linked to the global economy and geopolitical sensitivities. Surrounded by China, Russia, Japan, and South Korea. It is a totalitarian police state with self-imposed isolation from outsiders, secretive and brutal, and a nuclear weapons program that has accelerated faster than Western intelligence thought possible. Nationalistic and scarred from foreign invasions, occupation, and division. Most North Koreans are not allowed to travel outside the country. Just asking can get you interrogated, or worse. Traveling within the country requires strict permissions, and only the elite and party faithful live in the capital, Pyongyang, and a select few of them have access to the internet. But beyond the saber-rattling and headlines, they are a people we rarely get a glimpse of, and they rarely get a glimpse of us. Accessing news of the outside world is virtually impossible. The state-run media controls every message, where propaganda is not a dirty word.
There's always a mass military parade, these mass games they hold in their football stadium. It's like a wonder of the world. There's 150,000 citizens, I think, come into the stadium, fill the entire stands, and they hold these books of colored paper and flip them. So each person is sort of a pixel in these mass mosaics of propaganda. They're amazing to witness.
The images project order, strength, and devotion, carefully scripted to project the regime's desired image of itself, a modern, prosperous world power. But David Gudenfelder tells a different story.
I spent most of my adult life covering wars not only in Africa, but all across the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq. You go to a big world event thinking you're going to cover the big picture. You end up inevitably only telling the stories of a few people who are right in front of your eyes.
After 5 years as a freelance and staff photographer for the Associated Press, Gudenfelder was eventually assigned as the AP's chief Asia photographer.
When I first moved to Japan, there were these two major news stories. One was an ongoing violent military coup in Fiji, and the other was family reunions between North and South Koreans at a hotel in Seoul. I just assumed, because I had been a conflict photographer for so long, that my bosses would put me on a plane for Fiji, but in fact, they wanted me to go to South Korea to cover the family reunions, and I was a bit naive. I didn't fully understand the history of the Korean Peninsula, and I didn't know what I was about to see when I went there.
The family reunions between the North and South in 2000 were intended as a way for North Korea to soften relations with the South in an effort to tie into its economic engine. Instead, it was a painful reminder of a people divided.
I saw one moving episode after another. Families come together for the first time in 5 decades. Brothers who had not seen each other, who are now grown, old. There was a mother, very old now, and almost completely blind, and she was putting her hands on the face of her son for the first time in 50 years, trying to remember what he looked like. These families were only given 3 days, and then they were pulled apart again and sent back, and they would never see one another again. So I left those 3 days wanting to understand much more about Korea.
In the early 20th century, the Korean peninsula was occupied by a brutal imperialist Japan. When World War II ended, the Japanese were expelled by the Allied forces. Dai-Sil Kim Gibson, an independent filmmaker, was born in the North. Though very young, she clearly remembers the Japanese occupation and liberation.
When Korea became independent, I was 7 years old. That's an age that I will never forget. I was 7, but I remembered my country was emancipated from these colonizers who call themselves Japanese.
But some memories remain painful for Dai-Sil.
I was in private elementary school in the spring of 1945, and it was a beautiful spring day, and we were playing in the yard. Japanese teacher was passing by, and she said, "I just heard one of you speak Korean." So I was 7, but I said, "I did. You're a Japanese, so you speak Japanese. I'm a Korean, so I spoke Korean. So what's wrong with that?" I said that. She said, "Raise your hand like a surrendering soldier. 항복하는 군인처럼 손들어, you know?" So I did. And I was 7. Have you ever done that? Raise your hand like this for several hours? It's so very painful. I just couldn't cry. Then it would be my defeat.
The spoils of the war resulted in dividing the peninsula in half at the 38th parallel, creating 2 nations, the Soviet-backed North and the American-backed South.
When the Japanese were expelled, having occupied Korea for decades, you had basically a variety of political factions that were fighting for control of various elements of territory.
In those turbulent years following World War II, Kim Il-sung, grandfather to current leader Kim Jong-un, rose to power in the Soviet-backed North. Koreans were frozen in place, and families were divided as those factional struggles, North and South, played themselves out.
Koreans who lived in northern part of Korea had to decide whether they wanted to continue living there or they wanted to go to the South. My father was a very, very faithful follower of America, and he said, "There's no question, the family should go to South and live there." We left our hometown as the dawn broke. One winter morning in 1945, as I was leaving home, I just looked back and back and back. I could not step forward, as little as I was, because I had this feeling that I will never come back to the same house again. So I was a sad little girl, you know, holding my grandmother's hand, going to some strange place to find a new home.
Then, in June 1950, Kim attacked the South in an effort to reunify the peninsula.
It was an attempt to unify under communism, and it's very likely that Kim Il-sung had been led to believe by South Korean communists that the populace would rise up and welcome him, and that didn't happen. And also what he didn't anticipate was the United States would come in.
Days later, the North captured Seoul. The United States had little choice but to defend the South and what was seen as a communist grab.
The communists were now doing to Korea what Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese were doing in the opening days of the Second World War.
If the invasion succeeded and they overran Korea after only a token resistance, we would be in a bad way, and so would Korea.
The reason the US responded so quickly, the view was the dominoes were beginning to fall. And this was the first one. It was the first post-Second World War communist incursion. It was the first move of communism.
Dai Sil's family settled in Seoul. She was 12 years old when the Korean War began.
It was a very unusual time. Father was gone, oldest brother was gone, and we had to somehow survive under very changed situation. You grow up very fast under circumstance like that. Our house was directly bombed by American and the South Korean soldiers because there was a rumor going around that there was weaponry in our neighborhood where the North Koreans hid their weapons. I saw our house where I spent so many happy days just to go up in the fire. My mother decided to take all of us to the countryside because it was too dangerous to be in Seoul. And so we just walked.
As the war raged, American carpet bombing campaigns destroyed the North, killing 20% of its population. As many as 4 million died on both sides during the 3-year war. And the US government publicly contemplated the use of atomic weapons.
We need to look at why North Korea has a nuclear program. And the nuclear program goes back to the 1950s.
They remember and are taught some of the bigger moments in that history, including Douglas MacArthur's desire to get nuclear weapons that could be used against North Korea and China to end the Korean War.
The conflict ended in an armistice, not a peace treaty. Technically, the South is still at war with North Korea. And the 38th parallel remains among the most tense borders on the planet. Kim Il-sung consolidated his power and legitimacy through the 1950s and 60s. Through mass purges and an ideology of isolation and self-reliance, he would eventually create one of the most secretive, totalitarian, and unique states in history. Kim Il-sung was North Korea's sole protector and benevolent supreme leader, complete with a revisionist history.
Their tremendous victory in the Korean War is all about a story about the United States and about an American power that is constantly out to seek to crush them. When you go to North Korea and you talk to school children, which they let you do under extremely controlled circumstances, the story you hear is one of American aggression over the border. You get a completely different view of what started the war and a completely different view of how it ended, in which Kim Il-sung led his troops to victory and vanquished the Americans and the South Koreans.
Most Americans go through their life without thinking about North Korea very much. And North Koreans, they don't have the luxury not to think about us. And they're also taught that Americans committed the most horrifying atrocities imaginable during the war. The whole worldview revolves around this hostile relationship they have with the United States.
It is a unifying principle for the people, a common enemy. And most North Koreans believe it is only the Kims that have protected them for nearly 7 decades.
Everything that you get in North Korea is portrayed to the people as a gift from the beneficent leader, whoever that leader happens to be at the time. Every major project is described in controlled North Korean media as benefiting from the personal on-site guidance of Kim Jong-un, or before him, Kim Jong-il, or before him, Kim Il-sung. In other words, the whole government, but also the system of transferring benefits, is dependent on the generosity of one person.
Kim Il-sung rose to godlike status, a cult of personality the world has rarely seen, refined over an almost 50-year reign until his death in 1994, and carried on by his heirs. The driving force of this fanatical hold on the people is called Juche.
Juche means self-reliance. It's also referred to as Kim Il-sung-ism. So it's the North Korean version of communism. And the origins of this self-reliance, we can make everything ourselves, we don't need you. It's very peculiar, but in the Korean context, it has a profound resonance because Korean history is one of invasion and all sorts of abuse from major powers. North Koreans turned this history around and said, we're not going to take it anymore. Up yours, outside world. And for Koreans, there is a very profound thrill and an awe that someone would have the guts to stand up and be like that.
It begins part of that cult of the personality building, which really takes off in the 1960s. And then moving into the 1970s, Juche really becomes the ideological foundation in which that personality cult is built upon.
When Kim Il-sung died, the country mourned the profound loss of their benefactor and protector, the great leader. His son, Kim Jong-il, took power and continued his father's path of an autocratic rule of a police state, with Juche now a tool of control.
Kim Jong-il is a bit contradictory. Here's a man who loves a good Beaujolais, and he had foreign chefs flown in, 2 Italian chefs who stayed there for about a year, teaching the North Koreans how to make pizza. And so this isn't exactly the leader of the self-reliant country. So I think now that Juche has just become a tool to keep the people in control. You can't just police people forever.
Kim Jong-il continued building a powerful military, the 4th largest in the world, and a nuclear weapons program that he began to test.
The irony is, if you want to stop North Korea testing missiles, don't tell them to stop. Because the Juche man, the self-reliant man who doesn't take it from the outside world anymore, cannot be seen to cave in.
They feel like there's no balance of power between themselves and the United States, and they are intent on achieving a balance of power, and their ace in the hole here is a nuclear weapon that can threaten not just Japan and South Korea, but also the United States as well. At the end of the Clinton administration, Secretary Albright went to Pyongyang, and they were on the verge of an agreement that would have also frozen the missile program. All of that's a good thing, and that's the real success that's in the background and the history there.
So I went as a pool photographer to photograph that meeting. I stood in this room with Madeleine Albright, this like surreal, almost like Wizard of Oz looking room. The carpet had these giant flowers. The wall was this massive mural of like a crashing wave. She looked at me and said, "Where should I stand?" And I said, "I have no idea, ma'am." And then the doors flew open and he walked in, the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il. It was like someone stepping out of their television into your living room. After that, I tried every way possible to go back to North Korea. It was very, very difficult. The first trip was tightly controlled. I had this feeling that there was nothing real. It was like a facade.
Despite tight control by government minders, Gutenfelder continued his quest to show humanity under the thumb of the Kim regime.
I worked with a guide. They were part facilitator, translator, part assistant, and part, I guess, babysitter. I wasn't free to move anywhere I wanted at any time alone. We know so little about North Korea, in part because there are so few photographs that we've ever seen. There's been almost no independent visual record. To open a window onto a country that we are usually so completely closed off from. I can't think of a better place than North Korea to test the power of photography. And for me, photography is powerful for a number of reasons, but one of them is that you can't turn away from it.
Behind the facade that Gutenfelder photographed during his early trips is a dark side to the North Korean government's authority, a police state that is strict, and often cruel.
The police state in North Korea is based on a variety of things. One, lessons learned from the Soviet era, as well as the Japanese occupation. And these things were amalgamated into what became the North Korean police state. They evolved over time, but they were really taken from the lessons learned from the Stalinist era.
If North Korean citizens or even members of their family speak badly of the regime, any of them could be sent to prison camps.
The United Nations has done a very good job of using satellite photography, testimony of defectors, to draw a pretty brilliant picture of just how brutal those gulags are.
In North Korea, places like this, a 31-mile by 25-mile long work camp known simply as Number 22, are scattered throughout the country. Camps can be the size of small cities. Number 22 reportedly holds up to 50,000 people, and many who enter don't leave alive. Defector An Myung-chol was a guard at Number 22. He escaped through China and is one of the few guards to tell his story to the outside world. Though satellites provide the only photographs of his camp, An remembers every detail.
When we were educated as guards, we were told not to think of the prisoners as humans. The moment you enter a North Korean prison camp, you're no longer a human being. If you think you're a human being, there's no way you can survive in the camps.
An saw his fellow guards beat and sometimes shoot prisoners for minor offenses, like searching for mice to eat. Food was always scarce.
I remember seeing kids fighting over a corn kernel they found inside cow dung. A cow had eaten corn, and the children fought over it, and eventually washed it in the water and ate it.
Camp 22 is a family camp. The people there didn't actually commit crimes themselves, but were the family members of those who allegedly did. If a North Korean citizen simply complained to a friend about that month's rations, or did anything else that could be seen as questioning the Kim regime, his entire extended family, children, parents, cousins, could end up in Camp 22 for life.
The people didn't know how or why they ended up there. But they ended up being worked to death or dying from disease without stepping outside of that place for their entire life.
The camps are a key part of the regime's successful hold on power.
North Korea can't exist without prison camps. It will collapse without them. The most important thing North Korea needs is a means to frighten its people.
Despite the cost, many people are so desperate they try to escape anyway. Most go through China, which shares a nearly 900-mile border with North Korea. For years, especially after a famine in the late 1990s, missionaries and paid smugglers led desperate people out. Like this woman, who traveled under cover of darkness with her baby. Tens of thousands of North Korean refugees like her have come through China. Many are led out by Pastor Chun Ki-won, a South Korean living in Seoul, who risks his life bringing people to freedom.
Before the group makes its move, I tell them which parts are dangerous or what to look out for. They could potentially be thrown into prison camps or executed. So everyone is extremely nervous and frightened. You can never tell when you're going to be arrested by the Chinese police, or if you're going to be shot while crossing the border.
While some continue on to South Korea or elsewhere, those who remain in China live marginal existences and are under constant threat of repatriation back to North Korea. Though thousands have snuck out of North Korea through China, only a handful have successfully crossed the DMZ into freedom. The Korean Demilitarized Zone was created as a buffer between the North and South after the 1953 armistice. It's about 150 miles long and 2.5 miles wide. DPRK heavy artillery with a range of over 40 miles maintains a constant threat to more than 25 million South Koreans. The economic powerhouse and capital of South Korea, Greater Seoul, is just 25 miles from the DMZ. There are nearly 30,000 American troops and their dependents stationed in South Korea, with more than 6,000 stationed close to the DMZ, the most heavily militarized border on the planet. The Joint Security Area on the border of South Korea is the one place where North Korean forces stand face to face with the rest of the world. On one side of this concrete marker is North Korea. On the other, the joint American-South Korean forces. Every move is monitored. In this unique area, each side stations their best. The North puts only well-fed top officers here. And the South enlists men who are at least 5'8" or taller on their side. But only one side is worried that their soldiers might want to defect across the divide, the North.
On the DMZ, everyone is considered the enemy. Whether you're a North Korean resident, a soldier, or South Korean defector, we had to kill without question.
One of the few to escape directly across the DMZ to South Korea is a former soldier living in Seoul, Ju Sung-il. After a perilous night evading high-powered electrical fences, step by step he managed to make his way across one of the largest minefields in the world and surrendered at a South Korean guard post.
I personally believe that I made it through with the guidance of an invisible hand because of God's will.
But there was a huge cost to be paid. When asked what happened to his family as a result of his leaving North Korea, Ju would only say,
I'd rather not talk about it.
After a stroke in 2008, Kim Jong-il's health declined rapidly. His heir, Kim Jong-un, had little time to prepare when he ascended to lead the Kim dynasty in December 2011.
When Kim Jong-un took power, he was pretty much a mystery to American intelligence, and more of a mystery to everybody else. Inside the CIA, they kept a photograph of Kim Jong-un that you would see pinned up sometimes on people's desks in his school days in Switzerland. And they were trying to base their estimates of what kind of leader he would be on how he was out on the soccer field. So that wasn't a really good test. His brutality is obvious. He's executed family members. He had his half-brother assassinated. He's put members of his military commission in front of anti-aircraft guns and brought crowds out who can report how the body was shredded as they were executed. So he's doing the classic dictator's message sending.
Kim Jong-un laid down the Rosetta Stone of where he wanted to take this regime. People would no longer have to tighten their belts. This was an important statement by Kim Jong-un. There was no mention whatsoever of the nuclear program. His legacy was to basically create the strong and prosperous nation. And then what do we see in the beginning of 2016? We see the fourth nuclear test. Why? Because Kim Jong-un was then beginning to consolidate his power. This would be the launching of the Kim Jong-un era. He had to show legitimacy. And if he couldn't show legitimacy on the economic realm, he had to show legitimacy in the security realm.
The 1994 nuclear freeze, at times disregarded by the DPRK, was abandoned by George W. Bush.
The Bush administration basically said the North can't be trusted, and the whole agreement unraveled. At that time, the North had no nuclear weapons, and today they have what experts say could be more than 20 nuclear weapons. And now they have a missile that can reach long distances and maybe even the United States. So there's been an exponential growth in the program, in the threat, and if that agreed framework from 1994 were still in place, we'd be a lot better off than we are today.
It's the only card Kim has to play. Once the nuclear weapons are proven, he has a full hand with which to negotiate.
As time went on, the North Koreans basically wanted to figure out a way that they could deter the United States. They figured that they had South Korea deterred because of the artillery that could be rained down on Seoul. But that doesn't prevent the United States from conducting regime change.
Across the three Kim dictators, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un, there's been one common theme, which has been that their development of missiles and nuclear weapons and their effort to combine the two as the ultimate survival strategy. For Kim Jong-un, the issue is what happened to the dictator who gave up his nuclear weapons. And that was Muammar el-Gaddafi.
In 2003, the Libyan leader had the rudimentary components to begin a nuclear program. When caught by the West, he agreed to give up the weapons. Then, in 2011, as the Arab Spring spread, Libyans rebelled. As Americans, Europeans, and some Arab states came in to support the rebels, Gaddafi was not able to put the rebellion down.
Ultimately, he is chased around the country, pulled out of a ditch, and shot by his own people. Believe me, they watched the video of that in Pyongyang. And they asked the question, had Muammar Gaddafi played this differently? Had he built those centrifuges? Had he developed his own nuclear program? Had he ultimately gotten weapons? Or at least if the West had thought he might have weapons, would he have ended up dead in a ditch? They think not.
That struck the North Koreans in a very profound way. That really cemented in their mind that they needed to have a viable nuclear deterrent that could strike the United States in order to prevent the United States from engaging in regime change.
So it's entirely rational that they would think that these weapons are the ultimate protection.
To understand today's North Korea at a time of heightened tensions between the U.S. and the DPRK, the North has launched a charm offensive and invited American journalists on tightly controlled visits.
The charm offensive is this. Normally, the North Koreans don't just let Western reporters come in the country. They will invite groups of Western journalists in for special occasions, like military parades. This year, they've tried something a little different. They have invited maybe a half a dozen American news organizations to visit the country on discreet visits. We spent 5 days there. And it was so unusual because we got to do our own trip, and in consultation with the North Koreans, we were able to devise an itinerary.
Along with Nicholas Kristof, Carol Giacomo had the chance to experience a place she's reported on for 25 years.
I think the North Koreans have been persuaded that it was worth trying this effort to reach out to Americans and have Americans better understand where they're coming from and what their argument is against the United States. You asked, did they succeed? I really believe it's important for journalists to go places and actually talk to the people in country, not just write from afar. If you can go on the ground, get your own sense of reality, have a chance to interview people, even when you know that they are handpicked by the government, I just think that you can get a better textural sense of what's going on. And so to that extent, it certainly was a successful trip to me because I got to understand more what North Korea is about, and I also got to understand and hear from North Korean officials what their beef is with the United States and where they think this whole crisis over the nuclear program is going. I came away believing that they wanted talks with the United States at some point, but that they weren't ready to have them yet. And they're not ready to have them yet for two reasons. One, I believe they still have some more work they want to do on their nuclear and missile program. And two, I think that President Trump's speech to the UN was an inflection point that made it harder to have talks.
The depraved.
He talked about destroying North Korea, and he also made a personal attack on Kim Jong-un, and that resonated very loudly
Rocket Man.
in a very negative way in North Korea. It completely played into their narrative.
The United States may have to swallow a bitter pill, which means we may have to reward bad behavior.
We have kicked the can down the road long enough.
I think diplomacy is the only way forward, but I don't see right now a serious focus from the U.S. administration on going down that road unless it's something in which they can get the North Koreans to agree to denuclearization, which the North Koreans will never do.
Our diplomats will speak from a position of strength because we do have military options.
The military option will not work because North Korea could respond in very devastating fashion against South Korea, which would mean hundreds of thousands of people killed. So I don't see that as an option.
The United States.
The current U.S. policy to quell the North Korean weapons program is one of economic pressure, called sanctions.
What we're facing now is a U.S. government that frequently thinks you can bring North Korea to heel by totally isolating it, and a North Korean government that believes that isolation is the key to their survival.
The UN Security Council has agreed to limit or end trade with the DPRK, but the Kim regime saw this coming.
North Korea basically game planned this out before the sanctions even began, before they started their 2016 campaign of nuclear and missile tests. They hoarded resources, including oil and things like that. They also have a very sophisticated operations abroad for bringing in hard currency. And while the sanctions have done great damage to some of these networks are always evolving and constantly changing. And so it's kind of like this grand game of whack-a-mole. As you knock down one, another one appears somewhere else.
The North's economic networks skirt the UN sanctions in a variety of ways. But one of the most threatening is a sophisticated cyber power, which Western intelligence underestimated, much like they underestimated its nuclear ability. 6,000 operatives work outside the DPRK borders. They came close to a $1 billion heist from the New York Federal Reserve. A spelling error kept it from happening.
That Kim Jong-un is tech savvy is clear from the fact that he developed a pretty good cyber core. They have stolen $80 million out of the Bangladesh Central Bank. They have, we believe, made use of American-developed and surreptitiously released cyber weapons, some of them to raise money and some of them simply to show that they can exercise power beyond their borders.
Some estimates are that North Korean cybercrime brings in $1 billion a year in hard currency. Ransomware, Bitcoin manipulation, hacking banking systems, and the like have proven an effective way to reach within U.S. borders and other countries North Korea considers enemies. In November 2014, North Korea hacked into Sony Pictures Entertainment's computer systems to stop the release of The Interview, a comedy that made fun of Kim Jong-un and plotted his assassination. The attack released embarrassing emails about Hollywood stars, but more importantly, it fried 75% of Sony's computer network, crippling business as usual.
A tiny little country, broke, fourth-rate power, managed to bring down a powerful movie studio. This enabled him to reach into the United States in a way that a nuclear weapon never could. The fact that they had the imagination to go do it, that they recognized that cyber gave them the opportunity to go do this, that was all pretty remarkable.
David Gutenfelder has seen a different North Korea than the West is accustomed to. Beyond the speculation and geopolitical rhetoric,
In 2011, the Associated Press decided that they would open an office in North Korea. I begged to be the official AP Pyongyang photographer. So between 2011 and now, I went almost every month, spending a week, 10 days, almost every month in the country. Through photography, I discovered that there was something more than this facade, more than the propaganda. My job was really to get as far out there as I could go and as close and intimate as I could possibly be with people and tell their story. I'm not sure I would say that my pictures are good pictures. It's not the kind of place where you can like get out and move and work a photograph, and a lot of the photography that I did was through the windows of my passing vehicle. I found that that was some of the most interesting, most candid, most real photography that I could do. What's good about my work there is that all of these pictures, many of them seemingly very ordinary, start to add up to something. I just want to show people waiting for the bus, people going to work, people with families, people just getting by, because I wanted people to know that there's something more than just all the saber rattling and geopolitics and things that you, as a news photographer, you run past on your way to the dramatic event, where somehow the most kind of powerful pictures.
In 2013 and 2014, Dae-sil Kim Gibson was permitted to travel to North Korea to film People Are the Sky. They were her first trips there since 1945. There she met and talked with many North Koreans.
I heard a lot of stuff about North Korea, and I knew that about 85% of things that I heard from mainstream were pure. I had to go decide myself what North Korea was like. So that's when I decided I had to go. What I found when I finally went to North Korea, there were people living there. They were lovely people, they were nice people, they were intelligent people, they were laughing people, people with a lot of energies.
No one believes there's real people there. I found myself arguing with people who would say, oh, that's not true. There's not a father with his daughter in a supermarket. That's all just fake. It was very surprising to me that I was having to defend that there was real life and real people living lives in North Korea. Things changed dramatically for me over the years. My hope the whole time that I was working there was to give a fair, honest view of this country. So when the minder fought with me or argued with me or asked me about a particular photograph after they saw it published in a magazine, I could always stand behind it. I would say, this is what we saw. We were there together. And it always won the day.
A complicated puzzle remains. How best to deal with a nation of so many contradictions.
I don't think that North Koreans can understand how the country would operate if it was not a family business. And family business is the right term for it, because this is essentially a corrupt, brutal family business, a sort of mafia family with a seat at the United Nations.
Whatever you think about the leader, and he certainly is ruthless, and he is determined to stay in power and keep his regime in power. But he's got a plan, and he's executing that plan, which is to develop a nuclear program and the missiles to deliver it that, as they say, will prevent the United States from blackmailing North Korea anymore.